Om Tavakatamratam Tapta Jivanam Kavivarititam Kalmashapaham Sharavana Mangalam Shrivadatatam Bhuvigananti Bhuriyajana. Om, your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome everyone to our class on Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. If you're following along in the book, we're on page 83. This is the translation by Swami Nikhilanandaji. And this is M's second visit to Sri Ramakrishna, and probably in February, but he didn't start keeping track of the dates after maybe his fourth visit. But in any event, this was probably February. Some people think maybe March, but generally they think February. And M had asked the question. He asked 4 questions actually. We're up to the question, under what conditions does one see God? Master, cry to the Lord with an intensely yearning heart, and you will certainly see him. People shed a whole jug of tears for wife and children. They swim in tears for money. But who weeps for God? Cry to him with a real cry. The Master sang, cry to your mother Shama with a real cry, O mind. And how can she hold herself from you? How can Shama stay away? How can your mother Kali hold herself away? O mind, if you are in earnest, bring her an offering of bell leaves and hibiscus flowers. Lay at her feet your offering, and with it mingle the fragrant sandal paste of love. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he uses this term, it's translated an intensely yearning heart. This is the term Vyakulata in Bengali. Vyakulata comes up so many times in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and it's given so much emphasis that we can really say that this was almost the final teaching, most important teaching of Sri Ramakrishna. We can't take it in isolation because this is a culmination. Everything leads up to this feeling of Vyakulata. One of the Swamis, early Swamis, I don't remember who, he said that Thakur actually taught Vyakulata yoga. This was his spiritual path. We know that the others are all paths, the Jnana yoga, Karma yoga, Bhakti yoga, Raja yoga. But Sri Ramakrishna taught this almost as an independent path. And there's a huge range to meanings of this Vyakulata. It sounds very innocent here. He said, cry to the Lord with an intensely yearning heart. But Sri Ramakrishna gives different illustrations that gives us a sense of the intensity of this longing that is required. One illustration he uses very often, and that's with regard to himself, because he went through this period of this intense yearning. He said he used to feel as if his heart were being wrung like a wet cloth. Now, most of you know in India, there's something called, at least in Bengali, gamcha. Hindi also, they say gamcha. Gamcha. South India? No. Anyhow, gamcha, it's not like a towel that we have in the West. It's not big and fluffy. It's a very thin type of cotton. And after bathing, it can be worn also to take a bath if you do it in Ganges or something like that. And then afterwards, when the regular cloth is put on, it'll be taken out and they'll wring it. They'll get all of the water out, and it dries very fast, a very light thing. So we can imagine when the Sri Ramakrishna felt that literally as if his heart were being wrung like that. So it's the other meaning of Vyakulata is really intense anguish or some type of agony, almost a painful type of situation. we can only get a slight hint of it when we look at the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Another common example he used to give is the disciple said to the Guru exactly this question: under what conditions does one see God? And the Guru said, come along with me. And there was a nearby pond, and they both entered into the pond, and then the Guru took the head of the disciple and pressed it underwater and held it there until he felt the disciple struggling as if he was about to die, drowned to death. So then he let him up. And then he said, how do you feel? And he said, I felt as if I were about to die. I felt as if the life was leaving, but my heart was palpitating. I didn't know what would happen. And then the Guru said, when you have that type of feeling out of longing for God, know that you will realize God. So this Vyakulata, when Thakur instructs us to try to cultivate that feeling, we have to know that there's a limit, that we won't experience it the way that he did. There's a very common expression that we hear. Thakur himself used it, that he made the mold and all we have to do is pour ourselves into that mold. Now we have to understand that that mold is very often his teachings. It's not always his life, because he did things in his life, types of spiritual practices that we can't do and that he didn't recommend that we do, that would be impossible for us. In fact, he used to say that he went through so many spiritual practices, many of which he completed within 3 days, that an ordinary person will take a lifetime to complete. So we have to understand that we cannot emulate him in certain respects. Other respects we have to, or we have to try to, knowing that we can't do it fully. But there are other things that we just stand in awe and we observe what he did. Then there are other types of things where we do just a portion of what he did. He used to say, I've done all 16 annas. That means 100%. All you have to do is 1. So 1/16 of the whole will be enough for us in spiritual practice. And even that is a tremendous amount. We can't imagine even the direct disciples, how much did they do. But we get a sense of the extreme form of Vyakulata when we look at the spiritual practices of Sri Ramakrishna and his first realization of Mother Kali. We can't say he did any spiritual practice. He didn't do sadhana in the ordinary sense. He didn't have really a guru. This was his only spiritual practice, where he didn't really have a guru. There was one, Kenaram Bhattacharya, who initiated him into the mantras of Kali worship just as a formality. He wasn't really his guru. This was the spiritual path that Sri Ramakrishna followed. That was no path. It was he had no guide. It was just this intense, tremendous longing of the heart, and this longing manifested itself in such intense ways that people couldn't understand it. They would see him rolling on the ground, rubbing his face would be bleeding. He would spend the whole night in the pine grove north of his room with the temple garden at Dakshineshwar, just calling on God, calling on the Divine Mother, reveal yourself. And he would come back in the morning, his eyes would be bloodshot. He said 6 years he went where he hardly ate anything, and sleep left him completely. Hard to imagine, but he said sometimes he would even try to close his eyelids to see if they could remain shut, and they would open again. So he underwent this tremendous period of Vyakulata, this tremendous longing for God realization. And what was the culmination? The pain that he experienced and the agony and anguish of heart that he was feeling due to not having realized the Divine Mother became so strong that one day he said, Mother, reveal yourself to me, or I'll take the knife that's hanging on the wall in the Kali temple, and I'll cut my throat. And he was about to do it. It wasn't that he was bluffing, reaching for that knife, and then he had that first experience of the vision of Mother Kali. We don't know exactly what that vision was. His only description was that he felt himself engulfed in an ocean of consciousness, of wave after wave of bliss, until he lost all consciousness, awareness, and was lost in that state. He didn't know how long he remained in that state, but when he gained outer consciousness, on his lips were the words Ma, Ma, Mother, Mother. So many people feel that he had some type of vision of the Divine Mother. We say that because his Nirvikalpa Samadhi experience seems to have come only later with the Totapuri. So this is one example of this state of perhaps Savikalpa Samadhi or Bhava Samadhi that is also takes us to that highest state. It's not that he didn't have full God realization because it was Savikalpa Samadhi. No, he had, of course, the highest type of experience at that time. Now, the very odd thing is that even after this, when he took up the different spiritual practices, that again, this intense longing for realization would come. In the life of an ordinary sadhaka, realizing God in one form is enough. And there'll never be any interest in doing it again, and all doubts are gone, and one is full of bliss. We read that Thakur, after that experience, was always blissful. Life was full of bliss. But he would go through these periods when he would experience again this anguish of heart, this agony of heart, to have that realization. And it seems that there's a hierarchy also in the Vaishnava scriptures, especially. They will go through the different bhavas. There are 5 panchabhavas. There are 5 different spiritual attitudes, and the highest is called Madhura Bhava. We're reading it nowadays in our evening class here at the ashram, that when Sri Ramakrishna practiced that, one takes the attitude of Radha, trying to realize Sri Krishna, and Radha went through that period of intense longing and feeling of separation. This is called the Viraha Bhava. This Madhura Bhava has 2 different elements to it, Viraha Bhava and Milana Bhava. Viraha Bhava, when she was separated from him, that sometimes she would swoon, sometimes she would lose consciousness. The longing to see Krishna, see Sri Krishna again, was so strong that she'd have a burning sensation throughout her body. Even blood would ooze out of the pores of her body. Now, we read of only one other case in the history of this type of spiritual practice, that is Chaitanya Deva, until we get to the life of Sri Ramakrishna. And he said that he experienced all of those things. And this is after his realization of Mother Kali. He felt this longing on all of the different paths when he was worshipping Rama, taking the form of attitude of Hanuman and others, but it was most intense during this Madhura Bhava period. So he says that he underwent all of these. There, in the scriptures, they talk about 19 different signs. This Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, they wrote about all of these things. And it was because when the Bhairavi Brahmani came and saw all of these manifestations in Sri Ramakrishna, bodily manifestations, this is weeping and hair standing on end, all of these things, that she knew that this was not ordinary madness or any disease or illness, because she was an expert in several fields. And one was in the Vaishnava tradition, in the life of Chaitanya Deva. Other was in tantric types of sadhanas. So immediately she knew that this is the type of divine manifestation that comes when this Vyakulata comes this tremendous longing for God, and she was able to assemble all of the pundits, and by quoting from the scriptures and showing the life of Radha and the life of Chaitanya Deva, that Sri Ramakrishna was going through that same thing, and therefore he was of that same stature as Chaitanya Deva. We see this Vyakulata to a certain extent in all of the direct disciples, but especially in the life of Narendra, Swami Vivekananda, during the Kashipur period, especially pronounced at that time. He was studying for his law exams without the least interest. His father had died. His Gurudev, Sri Ramakrishna, was suffering from an incurable disease, and still he felt his obligation, and he was supposed to do it, but he said one day that his heart became so filled with longing to see Sri Ramakrishna, and such a distaste for worldly life and for the study of the books and everything, that he threw the books away. He ran the whole way barefoot to Sri Ramakrishna and laid his soul open before him. So Sri Ramakrishna said, you see this Vyakulata, this longing that Narendra has. This is just a fraction of what I went through for all of those long years. So this is a very big thing. In the Bhakti Sutra, we find that this Parama Vyakulata, this is also one of the signs of the highest type of devotion. Dadvis Smarame, when we, if ever we could forget God, if it were even possible, then we would feel that tremendous burning and anguish of heart. Or in the absence of God, in that viraha bhava, that this is one of the signs of the highest type of devotion. Now, what do we do with this? We can't expect to have that. We can't fake it. We can't pretend. We can't go to the shrine and say, Thakur, reveal yourself to me, or I'll cut my throat with a knife. Because it won't happen. Then what will we do? Even Narendra, he said to M, I'm feeling like fasting to death until I have the realization of God. M says, very good. And then Narendra says, what if I get hungry though? Now, if someone like that could ask that question, what about us? So M says, eat something and then try again, start again. So for us, this is why this translation, yearning of heart, is more appropriate for us. I won't say it captures the real meaning of Vyakulata, but for us, and we'll see the way Thakur teaches it, that this longing for God and all of our spiritual practice, according to Sri Ramakrishna, is meant to increase this longing for God. All of the different spiritual paths will emphasize one particular thing. Say the path of knowledge, they'll say everything is meant to purify the mind and the heart and eliminate this feeling of I. Karma Yoga also. Bhakti Yoga, everything is meant to increase our feeling of devotion, to increase our feeling of love. For Sri Ramakrishna, all of the different paths ultimately are meant to lead to this Vyakulata. This is the purpose of sadhana, and not contradicting all of the other things. This is everything is true. We want to get rid of the ego, we want to get purity of heart, we want to develop love of God and everything, but for Sri Ramakrishna, the very final stage and the indispensable stage is this tremendous longing for God realization, and for him, that's enough, that's the essential thing. So this, Sri Ramakrishna, he sneaks it in here as if it's kind of a simple thing. But if we understand the intensity that's involved, the one-pointedness, the renunciation, the surrender, all of that, then we start to get a glimpse of what it really means. Because he's talking about God realization. He's not saying if you want to lead a good spiritual life, if you want to be good people, you want to get some contentment in life. He's talking about God realization. This is a very, very rare thing. And it doesn't happen unless we want that more than anything else in the world. And we become overpowered by that desire for God realization. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, it's like there's a tremendous storm, windstorm, and it's blowing up the dust and the dirt. You can't make out one tree from another. You can hardly see anything. To go through that type of stage that precedes God realization. So we'll see. He says, continuing, he said, longing is like the rosy dawn. This is another one of his great teachings. This fits in with this idea. Arunodaya. He used this expression that if we look at spiritual life as being in the dark, now it's the middle of the night time, we're in the dark, we're waiting for that illumination, that realization, and we don't know how long it'll take. So we're waiting and waiting and waiting. We have no idea how long it will take before the sun rises, until, lo and behold, we see a little pink in the horizon. We see a little orangey pink color. So we haven't seen the sun. But as soon as we see that, we know that it's just a matter of time. 10 minutes, 15 minutes before we start seeing. Suppose we're at the horizon, we're looking at the ocean where it's rising up, and we can just see that the very beginning. As soon as we see that, we know within 15, 20 minutes, half hour, that the sun will be risen. So this is what he means. Longing is like the rosy dawn. Once we have that, then our illumination, our enlightenment, or God realization is absolutely certain. There's no question about it. There's no stopping the sun when it gets to that point. Otherwise, we don't know how long it'll take, or what we have to do, how much patience it'll take. But this is that sign. So his longing is like the rosy dawn, Arunodaya. After the dawn, out comes the sun. Longing is followed by the vision of God. So if we think of this in terms of the steps of a ladder to the roof, one of the examples that Thakur uses, this longing will be the very final rung before we get to the roof itself. Longing is followed by the vision of God. Then Sri Ramakrishna continues, God reveals himself to a devotee who feels drawn to him by the combined forces of these three attractions. The attraction of worldly possessions for the worldly man. There are people in this world that cling to their possessions. These are the most important things to them. They'll do anything. They'll lie and cheat and steal just to own the largest number of things, have the most money. They're really miserly people. So that clinging, that longing to possess, if we have that feeling, this is one. Attraction of worldly possessions for the worldly man. The child's attraction for its mother. This is the small child who, if the child gets lost, then you'll hear the child screaming, "Where is my mother? Where is my mother?" I mentioned the very first session that we had that this happened to M. When his mother took him for the very first time to Dakshineshwar. He was probably 4 or 5 years old, and they were in front of the Kali temple and the Nath Mandir, and somehow they got separated. And M, not seeing his mother, began to weep and cry for his mother, and some a very kindly Brahmin gentleman, priest, came over and patted his head and found his mother for him and everything, and M later felt that was probably Sri Ramakrishna himself. But we all know what the small child, how the small child feels when the mother is somehow gone, that they've lost the mother, or just for some reason. Thakur says they're outside playing with their friends and their toys, and then for some reason they lose interest in everything and they only want to see their mother. And the third, and the husband's attraction for the chaste wife. So if one feels drawn to him by the combined force of these three attractions, then through it one can attain God. The point is to love God even as the mother loves her child, the chaste wife her husband, and the worldly man his wealth. Sometimes Thakur uses the other term, anuraga. Anuraga, this intense love for God. These go together, Vyakulata and anuraga. Of course, we can have Vyakulata even in the path of the impersonal, infinite, absolute reality. And we can see this in the life of Buddha, that intense longing to realize the truth, that nothing else mattered. He had to realize the truth. This is also a type of Vyakulata, but on all of the devotional paths, it'll involve this anuraga, this love of God. It is necessary to pray to him with a longing heart. Again, the Vyakulata or Vyakulhoi, he says, with his longing heart to pray with God. That means there has to be an intensity to it. And this intensity, there are things we can do in order to bring it about, but it comes on its own. It can't be forced. It comes as the result of really intense spiritual practice. It can come as the result of actual failure in spiritual practice. The more we try and the more we fail to realize God, the more the intensity of this longing comes. We'll get the story of the bird on the mast of the ship. This bird will not be able to just cling to God unless it uses up all of its energy in trying to fly in every direction to find the land. Another example, we'll get to that more later. But this sadhana is meant for the achievement of Vyakulata, and spiritual practice is indispensable unless one is just born with this very sattvic nature and from very birth longs for God. It is necessary to pray to him with a longing heart. The kitten knows only how to call its mother, crying, mew, mew. It remains satisfied wherever its mother puts it. And the mother cat puts the kitten sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes on the floor, and sometimes on the bed. When it suffers, it cries only, mew, mew. That's all it knows. But as soon as the mother hears this cry, wherever she may be, she comes to the kitten. Now, this is an example that Sri Ramakrishna uses many, many times under the heading of Sharanagati. Sharanagati and Vyakulata go together, but the Sharanagati means surrender, taking shelter with the mother. It leads to a type of contentment. It's a very wonderful thing, but it differs from Vyakulata in the sense that Vyakulata, we have no contentment. This is what in Christian scriptures is called divine discontent. This contentment manifests in two ways in the devotee. One is we're content with whatever we get. Worldly things, we don't care about them. Very simple food, simple clothes, enough money to live. Whether people are nice to us, not nice to us, it doesn't matter. We're content with whatever, we accept whatever happens. We have this surrender. But when it comes to spiritual life and spiritual attainment, we have no contentment whatsoever. Sri Ramakrishna, at the end of every day, he would, before his realization, he would climb to the roof of the chadni and he would call out to the Divine Mother, weeping, Mother, another day has gone and I haven't realized you. So that type of discontent, but at the same time, he paid no heed whatsoever to what type of clothes he was wearing, to what people thought about him, anything like that. So this is also a very wonderful type of condition, this Sharanagati. Is a great blessing if, at least on that aspect of our life, we can get this contentment, this santosha. This is what Holy Mother said was the greatest treasure in life. Santosh, this contentment. There's no greater treasure than that. But at the same time, we can't remain content with our spiritual progress if we want to realize God. We can be content that we're trying our best. We can be content that it's out of our hands. We can be content that let Mother do with us whatever she wants. But there comes a time in the life of a true spiritual aspirant, or maybe extraordinary spiritual aspirant, where one cannot rest even with this feeling of Sharanagati. that, yes, I'm accepting everything, I'm surrendering. Suppose somebody says, okay, it's not your lot in life to realize God. And we say, okay, I accept that. This type of devotee will say, no, I have to realize God in this very lifetime, otherwise this life is wasted. And that type of intensity will bring about this, and can bring about God realization. This is the end of M's second visit. The very, very important, it's good to go back and read this section every once in a while, because the answer to these 4 questions that M gives are essential, the most important elements of spiritual life. Now, there'll be many other, of course, wonderful things. Don't think that the rest of it is not extremely useful. But this is the end of that second visit. We get to the third visit. And this, again, there's no separate date to it, because M had not yet started that practice of keeping track of the dates. It was Sunday afternoon when M came on his third visit to the Master. He had been profoundly impressed by his first 2 visits to this wonderful man. This, of course, is an understatement. He was not simply impressed. He had never seen anyone like that. He was dumbstruck. He counted the seconds before he could go back to seeing him. We read that over and over again. All of them, all of those who were Sri Ramakrishna's own people, his inner circle, the Antaranga Bhaktas, which included the householder devotees as well as the monastic devotees. They would all say, the second we left him, that we counted the moments till we would be able to see him again. And many would also say, who was it? Where were we? That when they were with him, they were like friends. There's a very beautiful verse in chapter 11 of the Gita, where Sri Krishna has that very same feeling. He says to Sri Krishna, oh, I've been addressing you as my friend. We sit in the same bed. We've just as if we're buddies and everything. I had no idea that after seeing that universal form, your real nature. So sometimes they would leave and think, who was that man that I was sitting with? And really, were we seeing him going into samadhi over and over again, and then coming down and laughing and joking with us, just like he's our own age, just like one of the kids. He used to just play these jokes and tell naughty jokes and then go on picnics with them, just like one of them. So they would be fooled in his presence sometimes, and they would talk to him like one of their friends. But afterwards they think, oh my goodness, who was I with? So this was M. He'd been profoundly impressed. So a little bit of understatement. By his first 2 visits to this wonderful man, he had been thinking of the Master constantly. We can take this literally. Constantly. And of the utterly simple way he explained the deep truths of the spiritual life. Never before had he met such a man. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on the small couch. There are 2 wooden beds in his room. The larger one was against the wall where he slept, and the other one was generally where he sat when he met the devotees. The room was filled with devotees who had taken advantage of the holiday to come see the Master. Generally, people came on Saturdays and Sundays, or any special holiday, the Durga Puja time or something like that. So if he wanted to give any special advice, especially to the young future monastic disciples, he would say, come during the week sometime. Come on a Tuesday, or come when the others aren't there, and he would give them private type of advice. M had not yet become acquainted with any of them, the other devotees there, so he took a seat in a corner. M was very shy, we know that. M smiled, the Master smiled as he talked with the devotees. He addressed his words particularly to a young man of 19 named Narendra. Now, this is another nice thing, the way M, just as if he doesn't know later who this Narendra is, or future Swami Vivekananda. He's writing this, even though he wrote it much later. By the time M actually wrote this Narendra was a world-famous Swami Vivekananda. But still, he's writing it from that point of view, that when he went there, he happened to see that there was a young man named Narendra. Thakur was talking to him. So Sri Ramakrishna addressed his words particularly to a young man of 19 named Narendra, who was a college student and frequented the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. This Brahmo Samaj had split because there was some controversy over Keshav Chandra Sen and the marriage he arranged for his daughter. So they broke into two different groups there. And Narendra was there. A little surprising that M doesn't seem to know him, because M also would go to the Brahmo Samaj, but it was quite large, and they had yeah, I never thought about that, but because Narendra used to sing in the choir there, and must have seen him, must have at least recognized him or something, but he doesn't say much. Now later, Swami Vivekananda and M developed a very beautiful, sweet relationship. Of course, Narendra died so young that it couldn't last that long. So if they met now in 1882, and Narendra only lived 20 years after that. He died in 1902. But they had a very close relationship. When we read the final chapters of the Gospel in Bharanagore, we find that when M would go to the Bharanagore Mutt, most often he would walk with Narendranath, and they would have long discussions and everything. Narendra was very, in one sense, very mature for his age, because he liked to have these friendships with the older devotees. He was very, very close with Girish Chandra Ghosh, who was even older than Thakur, I think, probably. Anyhow, much older than Narendra, but he would go to his home and they would have conversations, so he could have these friendships with the older people. And was only a few years older. But there was a big difference that Narendra is just a schoolboy, and M was a headmaster and a teacher, and later had his own school and everything, highly respected position in those days. So the Brahmo Samaj, the most important thing we have to note about this is that those who came from the Brahmo Samaj were meeting somebody that they hadn't met before. This Keshav, they looked upon him as, if they thought of him as the typical spiritual teacher, then he was very polished. He spoke very good English. He had gone to England. He met the Queen Victoria. He was very modern in his outlook. They didn't allow image worship. They didn't believe in the avatar. They didn't believe in the guru. A lot of traditional things. This image worship was considered a type of idolatry. They were very much influenced by the British, a little bit like a Christian Universalist type of, a Unitarian type of outlook of things. So when Narendra came, he already had some fixed ideas about spiritual life. On the other hand, he had a very traditional upbringing with his mother. He learned religion really sitting on the lap of his mother, that she would read from the Mahabharata, tell him all the stories, Ramayana and everything. And he did grow up worshipping the small image of Rama, and Sita and Rama and everything. So he had that side also. His eyes were bright, his words were full of spirit, and he had the look of a lover of God. Now, M is saying this. He had the look of a lover of God. We know that Sri Ramakrishna considered Narendra to be the most qualified to follow the path of knowledge. But Thakur always considered Narendra to be a devotee. And he said, you have the eyes of a bhakta, that this love of God is there. And Narendra himself, he used to say that, yes, we look at Thakur, we see only devotion on the outside, but deep inside, he had a tremendous, deep understanding of the jnani. And I may look like a jnani on the outside, but I have the tender heart of a devotee. He had a very, very tender heart. And towards the end of his life, this devotion to the Divine Mother, especially, manifested itself more and more. And devotion to the Divine Mother and devotion to Sri Ramakrishna, in the minds of many of them, including Narendra, became merged somehow. So one good example of this is after Narendra, he had his Nirvikalpa Samadhi in Kashipur, and Sri Ramakrishna said, "You've had this experience, but you have work to do. We're going to keep this locked up in a box. And I'll keep the key, but until you've done Mother's work," it's almost interchangeably. He could have said, "Mother will keep the key unless you do my work." That's almost the same. So we see that Thakur was so much identified with the Divine Mother. And they also looked upon him that way, and they worshipped him that way. There's a beautiful instance during Kashipur also. It was the night of the worship of Kali Puja, and they hadn't made any arrangements really, because Thakur was bedridden, dying from the cancer. But the devotees came, and they saw Sri Ramakrishna was there, and they realized, ready to accept their worship as Mother Kali. So Niranjan and some of the others, the garlands they had brought, they put around his neck, and many people offered flowers to him and everything. So this is what they call Ishwarabesh, that these great souls, these divine souls, become so filled with a certain mood and attitude of God, they become one with them. So that was that example that way. So the point is here that M is right, that Narendra could argue and brilliant intellect, very logical and everything, but deep down he had the look of a lover. He had the eyes, Thakur used to say, the eyes of a bhakta. M guessed that the conversation was about worldly men who look down on those who aspire to spiritual things. The Master was talking about the great number of such people in the world and about how to deal with them. Master to Narendra: "How do you feel about it? Worldly people say all kinds of things about the spiritually minded. But look here. When an elephant moves along the street, any number of curs and other small animals may bark and cry after it, but the elephant doesn't even look back at them. If people speak ill of you, what will you think of them?" Narendra: "I shall think that dogs are barking at me." Master smiling: "Oh no, you mustn't go that far, my child." Laughter. "God dwells in all beings, but you may be intimate only with good people. You must keep away from the evil-minded. God is even in the tiger, but you cannot embrace the tiger on that account." Laughter. "You may say, why run away from a tiger, which is also a manifestation of God? The answer to that is, those who tell you to run away are also manifestations of God. And why shouldn't you listen to them?" Okay, there'll be a long story here, but this is also an important point. There's something called lokeshana. Sometimes it means the desire for attainment of some heavenly sphere or something. Other times it can mean, and I like it better, the desire for approval, worldly approval. And we find that this can be a great fetterer, that if people are constantly worried about what other people think of them, especially worldly people or people that are in a position of authority or have some high place in society but aren't necessarily spiritual people. So this is a big question, and a very practical type of question. To what extent do we take into consideration the opinion of other people? Sri Ramakrishna used to use an expression, lok na pok. Thakur had a way with words. He liked these little plays on words. Lok na pok. If somebody says something to you, you think, is this a person or is this an insect? It's a funny type of expression. It's not meant to be derogatory or to look down, but if we're doing something and someone is there observing us, we may worry, oh, what are they thinking? If it's just an insect who's watching there, will we be affected by it? It means that we'll have our standard, we'll do things the way we think is right, and we won't pay too much attention to what other people think of us. The very interesting section the Narada Bhakti Sutras, where this is discussed. And we have some sutras that give actually opposite types of instruction. On the one hand, if one is leading a spiritual life and other people are critical, then we shouldn't pay any heed to them. We shouldn't care about the opinion of other people. But then it says also that we have to be concerned about society and how they look upon us, just to the extent that we set a good example. If we're thinking about the opinion of other people that we respect, and we find that someone we respect is a little critical, or they've observed something about what we've been doing that they don't think is right, of course it should matter to us. If we've done something the Guru is not pleased, then of course we shouldn't be happy about that. And we should try to find out. If there's criticism of us, then we have to ask, first thing we have to ask, is it legitimate? Have we done something that we can easily adjust and make amends and everything? Otherwise, who cares? People will criticize. We know that. And we look at the life of Swami Vivekananda. He was a perfect example. He really didn't care. And he was criticized right and left. There were a lot of people didn't like him. They thought he was arrogant. Even Sharad, who later became Swami Sharadananda, the first time he met him, he said, "Who is this person? He's sitting alone, he's singing a song to himself. He seems so conceited and everything, not paying any attention to anybody." And then later he went to Dakshineshwar, and Sri Ramakrishna said, "I'd like you to meet this Narendra." And then he went, he said, "Oh, it's that same guy." And they started talking, and he said, "Oh, is it really the same? How I misjudged him." And they became so close. They became very, very dear, wonderful friends that way. So, if we are convinced that we're really following the ideal that is important to us, and we find that people will criticize us for that, then we simply have to say, this is the way of the world. People will criticize other people just for fun. There's something called paraninda and paracharcha. When we take our brahmacharya vows, we're supposed to not engage in these two things. That means talking about other people and criticizing other people. And this is, of course, the Holy Mother's great message. So we should try not to do it, to judge other people that way. But if people judge us, then we have to think, will it sway me from the path that I'm on? And if it does, that means that I'm not very much dedicated to this spiritual life. On the other hand, is it valuable? Is it something that, yes, I didn't realize that I was behaving that way? Let me change. That's the second. Third thing is, we really shouldn't do anything to offend other people. If they don't like the type of spiritual life we're leading, then we try not to do it in their presence. We can have consideration for other people, at least that much. So we'll get a long story here, which I won't read this time. And this will be all about this idea of how much we should be concerned about the opinion of other people, especially if we see that God dwells within all beings. And then is it God himself and that person criticizing me? Maybe, but Sri Ramakrishna will say that God is also in the tiger. That doesn't mean that we go and embrace the tiger. We have to be sensible. There are a few stories that will come up that are very interesting because they show how practical Sri Ramakrishna was and how helpful he was. And when people had these questions, devotees had these questions about how to live in the world. So we'll stop here and continue from this page 84 next time, and I'll give closing prayer. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukam Bhathurvikraham Ishavataram Varnesham Hidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.